gentlemen. Welcome to yet another edition of your discursive, informative program. It is Global Insight on your Pan African television, and today we continue to look at the real stakes in South Africa, and of course, accentuating on the topic South Africa from a diplomatic
Have
applause
condemned the
to
viral circulation of
anti-illegal
fake videos.
The order is
migration,
very clear.
furial
The
anger,
impeachment
and
committee
of
must
course
be set up.
asking
How
the
soon,
question
from your point of
is
view,
the unity of the African
do you
continent
think it ought
at
to be
risk?
established?
The dream
I
of a
think the,
unified Africa
chief whip
characterized
of,
by
the
a
EFF,
common
because she's not here, she should have
identity,
written by now,
open borders, and
to
shared
the
economic
speaker to
prosperity
establish,
now
the
stands
impeachment
at a
process,
complex crossroads. The
immediately,
recent
because,
resurgence of the
we
movement,
cannot
like
wait
the
for
oppression
any
Dugula,
longer. We've been
has
waiting
echoed the
for too
painful
long
history
now.
of the
The impeachment
2008
process must kick in
xenophobic
with
crisis
immediate effect,
in
and that's
South
what we're going
Africa,
to
among
demand.
others,
And let's see the
organizing
hand of the
fierce
DA,
protests
which was
against
with us
illegal
when we were
migration.
saying let's impeach.
This
Now that
shift
they are eating
has placed the
bananas and
nation
apples,
in
let's
the
see if they'll be
international
able to
spotlight,
talk with a
not
full
as a
mouth.
symbol of diplomatic progress, but
The
this
order is
time
very
around
clear.
as a lightning
Cabinet
rod of
condemned the
continental
viral circulation of fake
condemnation.
videos
But then,
and
who
images
stands to
claiming
benefit
to be
from
attacks
this?
of foreign
These
nationals in South
movements
Africa. The
are
fake videos and
increasingly
images are
accused
not only fake,
of
but they are intended
weaponizing
to
chronic
undermine the good
unemployment,
reputation of South Africa
economic
internationally
stagnation, and
and
rising
undermine
crime
South Africa's
rates
pursuit
to
of a better
scapegoats foreign
Africa agenda.
nationals.
South Africans
According
are
to
within their
reports,
right
some
to protest
political factions
against
now
the spiraling
capitalize
illegal
on this
immigration challenge.
populist
But
agenda to
violence
secure
linked to those
electoral
protests
support,
in the past
directly
is not
undermining the
acceptable. And law
principles of social
enforcement must
cohesion,
deal with
regional
the
diversity,
instigators of such
and
violence
to
decisively.
a larger extent,
Cabinet
the
condemned the
people-to-people
opportunistic
diplomacy.
attempts to
By
hijack the
adopting
genuine
a
concerns of South
hardline
Africans
stance on
about high
immigration,
unemployment
the
and limited
youth-led
economic
movements have
opportunities
pushed
by
activism
mobilizing
into the realm
South
of
Africans
radicalism.
to destabilize the country
Yet beneath
and protecting
anti-illegal
jobs and
The order is
migrants'
very clear.
sentiment
The impeachment
lies a
committee must
thorny
be set
web
up,
of
yes. How
internal
soon,
political
from your point of
discrepancies,
view,
the
ought to
instability
be-
of a
do you
hung
think it ought
parliament,
to be
and the
established?
filtering
I think the,
drive of the African
chief whip
dream.
of, the EFF,
Can
because she's
mechanisms
not here,
like
she
the
should have
African
written by
Peer
now,
Review Mechanism,
to
the
speaker
African Union
to
as an
establish, the
institutional
impeachment
body in
process,
Africa, and the Pan-African
immediately,
Parliament,
because,
among other
we
stakeholders,
cannot
provide
wait
the
for
necessary
any longer.
bridge to
We've been waiting for
reconcile
too long
these
now.
domestic
The impeachment
frustrations
process
within
must kick in
continental
with immediate
unity.
effect,
And of
that's what we're
course,
going to
we are
demand.
asking
And
all
let's
of
see the
those
hand of the
questions
DA, which was
while
with us when we were
contextualizing
saying,
the
let's impeach.
situation in South Africa, where the xenophobic protests led by Operation Dodula and other groups actually, gathered mixed reactions across the African continent. So today on this panel, and with a great panel of experts, we want to actually separate noise from the fact, and of course present the realities of affairs in South Africa, both at the internal level and of course looking at the larger or the greater picture of the situation. Without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, we dive straight away to uncovering the panel, and with pleasure I want to introduce to you Dr. Michael Dimancho, civil society and of course political analyst, joining us here in the studio from the Republic of Cameroon. It's a pleasure having you to discuss the stakes of South Africa this day, Dr. Dimancho.
It's a pleasure to be here, Clarice, and of course, to share my insights with your valued panelists, those, of course, who are experts in the field of these issues of this nature. And of course, it's always a pleasure to be able to share insights. And, issues of Africa are issues that touch all of us right to the bone. And
Absolutely.
anybody who is called to talk about African issues, and as an African, it is like a responsibility, let me call it even an obligation, to be able to come help Africa come out of, these shackles of, imprisonment that we have had ourselves in, that we are being manipulated every day. And it appears as if the ideals of the founding fathers of the independence of Africa, they have not gone right deep into our marrows. And I think that it is time that some of us, of course, like experts who have gotten in deeper into this thing, knowing that in the 21st century, much of it is about manipulation, that we are able to educate and to say exactly how it is and how we are being manipulated to kill our own in the light of gaining freedom again, of gaining authority, of gaining our land, of gaining our resources. Of course, because when you look at the ideas of the forefathers,
Absolutely,
people
yeah.
like Steve Biko, the Kwame Nkrumahs, and all of that, I like to talk very much about Steve Biko because he was from South Africa, and the course of the program will be discussing, of course, the
Indeed,
ideas
indeed.
of people like Steve Biko who talked about black consciousness. And I must let you know, Clarice, that my next PhD thesis on black consciousness, which Steve
Indeed,
Biko from South Africa stood to defend. Thank you so much for inviting me
and
today.
thank you for giving importance to this, of course, rendezvous. Like you've highlighted, it is time for us to educate, inform, and of course, carve the African agenda. Let's now say welcome to Punima Anand, President, BRICS International Forum, joining us this day to continue to analyze the stakes affecting the African continent. You know, the world is a global village. It is imperative that we have diverse opinions to see how we can reconcile the differences or discrepancies tearing the African dream apart. Welcome, Punima.
Good evening, Namaste from India. I'm once again very happy to meet Clarices and Globus channel and our all friends from Africa. Today topic is really very important because it is related to South Africa and Africa. As we know now, Africa is getting very good impressions in the whole world. And this year when Trump got the victory, Africa after that Africa got the membership in United Nations Security Council. And another side, South Africa organized G20 conference and then they organized in 2023 BRICS summit in South Africa. So one side, South Africa is getting very good impressions and very international capacity to organize international forums and international um, uh, guests they can invite. So this gives very high impression to the rainbow of Nelson Mandela. I must say that Nelson Mandela sacrificed his life for the freedom and uh, the voice of Africa to be raised in whole world and especially in against coalition and capitalism and neo Nazism. He raised his voice at international level, and he due to his efforts, South Africa got the freedom. And this footprints is followed by other African nations also because they are colony of France or other nations in Europe, so now they are also trying to get freedom. As we know, this is a natural rule that water flows from top to lower side, and people see for the hope at upper side. So the small countries of Africa, they are having hope with South Africa, and South Africa need to give support and need to give uh, international alliances to small African countries. So this is the observation which I am feeling as an Indian, as a BRICS expert about Africa and South Africa. But now what is happening that inside South Africa, unemployment and opportunities are not equally distributed to the youth and new generation. This is the reason they are unsatisfied, they are having aggression, and their communities are coming out to take their rages that you said. But this acts which happens in Diola and one pregnant woman, so many stories I studied before this program, and I found that these all are not human supporting acts, and this is not real aggression of the South African people. This is, aggression or anger of some people who are not satisfied with their life, with their governance. So we need to understand better what is the reason of aggression, what is the region of problems. If we will analyze problem properly, we can find proper solution. BRICS given good funds to South Africa, and many migrants went to their countries and they got good employment, good opportunities to raise their livelihood. So now the role and responsibility we need to understand. And today topic is very good that one side South Africa and Africa is getting international image, international voice is raising. Another side in their domestic uh, side, they are getting internal aggression. So it need to make equilibrium between external and internal affairs, between external policies and internal policies, democratic policies. So this is all I would like to share in first round of our discussion. When my other panelists will discuss, I will understand more because they are from different parts of Africa. So, but
Indeed,
what
dear
my
Purnima, indeed, of course, now we can make a stop in South Africa and getting the very interpretation, especially from those based in South Africa with the realities of what happened in the country. The end of the month of April actually sent a different interpretation of affairs across the African continent, like you mentioned, Purnima. South Africa has gained international recognition in recent times. We saw the G20 actually summit, and of course the diplomatic maneuver in the United States of America that actually saw the continent hailing the Rainbow Nation as a master of diplomacy in the 21st century. But then today we are looking at the xenophobic attack which has resurfaced, bringing us again to asking hard questions of what is the real agenda behind the recent flare. With you, Dr. Dustin Lakika, who is a researcher associate with University South Africa, who want to have your holistic interpretation of the state of affairs in South Africa pertaining the recent xenophobic protests that actually attracted continental condemnation, and of course and seemingly some diplomatic contestations, bringing us to some sort of a point of uncertainty as to what the real agenda is for Africa and its various countries.
Thank you so
Your
much,
mic is
Clarice,
muted, please.
for giving me the floor. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for this opportunity to share some insight regarding some issues pertaining to migration in the Southern African context. To answer your question, I'll say that South Africa comes from a very traumatic history of apartheid marked by white domination over black majority. And after 3 decades of this apartheid, some steps have been made, especially with regard to freedom of expression and freedom of movement. But when it comes to socio-economic situation, the majority of the people, being black people, are overwhelmingly poor. So South Africa is facing many challenges in terms of unemployment, which is now sitting around 40% among the youth. South Africa is facing the issue around inequality. The resources are unequally distributed among the population. There is an issue of weak service delivery. There is issue of crime and insecurity in the country. All these problems bring frustration in people's life because people are feeling like they are abandoned after 3 decades of democracy. the lives of many people have not been improved. And when things are going wrong, when these socio-economic ills are not uprooted, so what comes to mind is migration. Migrants become the scapegoats, the people who are at the center of the problem. But I think looking at the situation in that way is very wrong, because I don't think that migration is the real problem that is stopping South Africa from achieving economic development. I think the problem is mainly about poor governance, corruption, and a lack of attention to the socio-economic hardship that affect people. So while protests are framed around illegal migration, as it is framed, but I think these protests reveal a broader crisis that has to do with economic situation in which many people find themselves, and they are not ready to satisfy their basic needs, and they think that it's migration. And in that context also, it also raises the issues around belonging and unbelonging. Who belongs and who does not belong? Who has access to resources and who does not have access to resources? And who must be excluded? So that's what is justifying the violence that you have been witnessing in South Africa currently. And I can say that it's not something that has started only now, because if we look at some studies that were conducted, especially the XenoWatch, which is an open system of collecting information relating to xenophobic violence in South Africa, it shows that since 1994 until now, about 1,258 cases of xenophobic violence have taken place in South Africa, and these violences have led to the death of more than 600 people. They have led to the looting of businesses and properties belonging to foreign nationals, and have also led to the displacement of many people. More than 100,000 people have been displaced. So it's a repetition, because it shows impunity that takes place. Because of that impunity, the situation keeps on repeating. But migrants are blamed wrongly. They are not the cause of the South African socio-economic ills.
Your statement to this topic, and we stay in South Africa this time around with you. Good news, Cadogan. Here we, from our preamble and what has already been said by some guests, we want to ask that, we see South Africa in some sort of an interplay between youth activism, nationalism, and then xenophobia, entangled in a web of uncertainty as a result of the political agenda of the country. So, what do you have to say about the recent attacks that actually xenophobic attacks? We heard many South Africans, particularly those who took part in the march, saying categorically that other Africans should leave their country, blaming foreigners for maybe the reason why they are unemployed. How valid is that to necessitate such hard stance towards a people of one identity? To you, Good News Cadogan.
All right. Good day to all your listeners across the world and to my fellow panelists.
I would like to start with describing South Africa as a nation. From both a history point of view and from an identity point of view, South Africa is a pan-African country. These protests are about governance failure. It's not about the rejection of illegal migration. It's more about saying we need to fix the rule of law. If we can fix the rule of law, we can fix the tension. From a historical point of view, our liberation in South Africa is built on solidarity from countries like Nigeria, Zambia, Tanzania, Ghana. So Pan-Africanism runs deep in our soul as a nation. But there are three realities that we need to look at. Most of these protests are peaceful and they are within the law. And secondly, the anger is at the overstretched resources and services when jobs cross the borders and also permits, labor law are not enforced. It is important to enforce these pieces of legislation. Thirdly, there is the criminal elements that exploit the moment. That is why then you'll find that some of the violence is not about genuine protest, but the infiltration of the protests by criminals. So I would like to propose two things in my opening. One is to actually professionalize home affairs, cut the corruption, enforce labor law equality, and coordinate within the SADC region and the African Union at large to actually ensure that governance happens across Africa, from Cape to Cairo. The reason there's migration is because there's a failure of governance right across Africa, and where you find that most of these citizens are not happy. In fact, all of the people who migrate illegally, so they are not happy with the governance of their country. They're not happy with their governments, and there is a very low number, even within the African Union, of countries that have signed the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, meaning that they are not committed to good governance. And lastly, it's about saying, as South Africans, we don't reject Pan-Africanism, meaning that we don't reject anybody that comes from Africa. We are asking that it must be governed. Not just preaching it, but governing it and making sure that there is governance on the other side of the border and on this side of the border. That's all I would say now for my opening.
And let's welcome Dr. Andy Ukweni, who is joining us from the United Kingdom, Nigerian, and of course, geopolitics and strategic studies expert. And of course, it's imperative to know, because when we look at the protests, Nigeria was one of the nations that actually resounded when the protesters were actually talking to the media. And of course, we want to have your own understanding of the situation and how this will actually affect social cohesion or probably regional collaboration among countries. We've already seen reactions from the Nigerian government patterning the situation. So let's have your first interpretation of the events in South Africa and how it relates to Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, Good Clarice, and good evening to the panelists for a really wonderful work so far. I must begin by saying that what we have is a Black Friday event. It's a heartbreaking news. It is an unfortunate development that.
Dr. Andrew, please, can you on your camera so that we can...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but unfortunately we cannot have your image. Can you activate your camera, please?
Oh, really?
Sure. Thank you. While waiting for Dr. Andy to activate his camera, ladies and gentlemen, I just wish to remind you that today we are focusing on the recent situation in South Africa, where key questions came to mind as to if really it's all about xenophobia, or probably if there is a keen agenda beneath the protest that we had lately. While I think it's imperative that we also join Paseka Farumeli to interpret the global understanding of what is happening, particularly in South Africa. He is a UNESA academic and member of the Convention for Pan-Africanism and Progress.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clarice. The first thing that I'd say is that good evening, good afternoon, good morning to those who are in the morning across the world. Very excited for this program. I've been looking forward to it for a while now. I think that two of the colleagues, specifically Dr. Dostin and Brother Good News, have basically covered the context that I think is very important for this discussion, particularly and specifically speaking to the historical realities of this country, the current realities of this country, where a lot of instability can happen in a country that is on a knife edge. Specifically with the recent attacks, I tried following them, made sure that I understand what is happening in this specific context. And when you live in a country that's always in a position of on a knife's edge, actually, when you live in a country like that, it is essential, especially when you are a foreign international, it is essential that you are realistic about the realities of that country and be cognizant of the fact that you do not want to play a part in being responsible for something that is tricky. Specifically, what I'm referring to is the context that happened in the Eastern Cape, where a Nigerian brother had a ceremony where they had said that he would be the chief of the, I'm sorry, I think it's the Igbo or Yoruba, I think it's the Igbo in the Eastern Cape. And that alone, once that trended, it became a very big thing, because South Africans, as the two colleagues said, who are in a very difficult situation, the majority living in next to nothing, they felt disrespected. And when you have a country that is so, on the edge, you need to be careful about what you do, especially when we speak in the context of our Nigerian brothers in South Africa. There's this stigma, whether warranted or not, that is associated with them, where they've been problematized a lot of the time. And you need to tread carefully. So that alone, that is actually where it started these recent attacks. Already we knew for years, we've had more violent attacks in this country that have been started by different things in the past. Now we found ourselves in a position where there's this brother in the KZN News, and I'm sure that you have seen him a lot of the time. He's one of the guys who are leading these marches, along with March and March and Operation Dudula. All of a sudden, you now had them coming out to protest that, but they did not necessarily just stick to that, because even the Nigerian embassy released a statement and said there was a misunderstanding. Before the Nigerian brother released a formal statement where he said he did not know, it was not what it was said to be. And he is apologetic. He did not want to start this instability. So I think with this context, specifically speaking to this current reality, we have found ourselves in a very difficult situation whereby we have found a lot of disinformation and misinformation circulating, especially outside the borders of South Africa, because there is this logic that South Africa is so destabilized right now and unstable that you would believe that you are not a part of this country. But I think something that is very important that we need to speak to outside of the context of what is happening right now is what is happening throughout the continent of Africa. And it's something that is very frustrating and infuriating, because I've seen leaders in Ghana, leaders in Nigeria who came out to speak against this, against these attacks outside of the reality that is happening in South Africa. And my worry is that they did not acknowledge something that is essential that Brother Good News spoke to, that they negated their responsibility as leaders. So naturally, humans are going to migrate. And with that understanding, the basic understanding that you need to first take accountability for what you do as a leader, it is essential for us to understand that if you cannot acknowledge that and you want to blame external figures, then you are going to have these problems where your people will still continue to be victimized wherever in the world that they find themselves. They'll still be treated as animals anywhere in the world because they do not want to be recognized as normal human beings. But I think that I will expand on these points a bit later, and I think that I will hand over to you, Clarice. Thank you.
Paseka, and going back to Dr. Andy, if everything is okay with you, you are welcome as we continue to interpret the greater extent the recent xenophobic attacks in South Africa. How does that undermine the dream of the African unity, African identity? Dr. Andy? Okay, we're continuing with you, Dr. Michael Dimancher. After actually listening to the preliminary statement from each and every speaker, we now continue to want to look at this issue of migration. When you listen to Good News Cadogan, he pinpointed that poor governance or bad governance is the reason for migration. And of course, when we're looking at also the preamble presented by those who took part in the protests, we're seeing unemployment, inequality, and this the blamed on foreigners. This is where I want us to capitalize, addressing the internal issues of maybe governance lapses, and of course, seeing foreigners as the reason why there is some sort of unemployment. And is there any veracity to probably warrant such?
Of course, people have talked about migration, and I would just want to say a word about the issue of migration. Migration is an age-old issue. It's an age-long issue. We cannot really be talking about issue of migrations today because migration is something that started even before the advent of colonialism and all of those. So we cannot be talking about migration as an issue. And if you even have to go to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, one of the issues is about the rights of each and every individual to move from one area to another. And therefore, people cannot be indicted because they travel from one area to another. And talking about migration, there are two things that cause people to migrate. There's what we call the push factor and the pull factors. And of course, any of these factors can cause anybody to migrate. And when you look at the UN and its clause on migration, people have the right to settle wherever. And I don't think that when you leave one country to another, you should be a cause of, insult, to be a cause of terrorism because you have left your own country. People have the choice. But then I would like to come back to this because it is not good to catch on every other thing to talk about what is happening in South Africa. I want to take a look at the issue in South Africa starting from the point of view of apartheid.
Absolutely.
Apartheid started in South Africa about 1948. Remember that South Africa got its self-rule in 1910. Mm-hmm. And as apartheid came up in about 1948. And since 1948, a lot of people have been struggling to get South Africa out of this shackle. And apartheid was about the white trying to segregate against the Africans. Yeah. And I have done the literature of Black consciousness. And you know, the literature of Black consciousness touches on issues of Afrocentrism, it touches on Pan-Africanism, it even touches on feminism, and all of those, and Black consciousness itself. And when you study issues of Black consciousness in South Africa, we touch on a figure like Steve Biko, and one of his famous book that he wrote is titled "I Write What I Like." And in this book, Steve Biko actually educates Africa. He recounts the experiences of Africa in the shackle or in the fence of apartheid. And at that period, from 1948, Steve Biko died about 1977. You know, most of his books were banned in 1973. A lot of Africans were meant to come together and to be able to fight for South Africa, because Steve Biko was for the issue of psychological liberation. And the psychological liberation that Steve Biko talked about was not just about that of South Africans. He was talking about Africa as a whole. And therefore, Africa as a single person came up to help liberate South Africa from the issues of apartheid that we had until till they got their what do you call this in 1994, their liberation in 1994, with Mandela coming up. And therefore, I do not know why it is up to now that South Africans will think that, okay, some people somewhere are coming into their country. But we are going to see why some people, why they have this mentality. Sure. They are only victims of stuff. Even those who are crying each day, apartheid, go back to your country, go back to your country. These very youths are victims of circumstances that we are going to see. Because when we talk about redefining the Blacks and reclaiming the Black identity, which Steve Biko talked of, I think that this was a time that the South Africans are supposed to be accommodative. And we actually, one of the ideas that he talked about very strongly was the issue of non-violence and Black self-defining. And then we're asking ourselves, how can a figure of that nature be able to talk to the world and Africans about non-violence and self-defining of African identity? And then today we are talking about South Africans standing in the street to tell other people to go. Now, let us move now up to 1994, where the South Africans got what liberation, their independence per se, with the coming up of, with the end of apartheid and the coming up of Mandela. I have said in many platforms that there was something about the end of apartheid and the coming up of Mandela as a savior in South Africa. And one of the things that I talk and I say to whoever wants to hear is that Mandela, yes, is held as a world leader, as someone who forgave people, someone who did well. But there is something that he did for South Africa, which I keep on talking about every day. Mandela gained political independence for Africa, but South Africans did not gain economic independence. I do not want to say that he wholly depended on Mandela to give them economic independence, but I must say that Mandela achieved 50% of what South Africans were asking for by giving them political independence. Yes, they had it, but I must tell you that one of the most important aspects of that independence was lacking, and that was economic independence that the South Africans, they needed to have. And that is why when that independence was gained, you remember that even the mining fields and all of that, those remained in the hands of the few whites. It appears as if, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o will say in one of his books, Our Marijuana 101, we ran away from cold land just to discover ourselves in frost land. Yeah. It means that what? They were crying and crying and crying, and immediately they thought that they have had their salvation, they have reached the promised land. They discovered that it was the beginning of another trouble. Yeah, it's just like another person will say in post-colonial literature that new dress, old dance. And it's the same thing, because people were crying for independence. Immediately they gained their independence, something else happened. And that's why we are even talking about neo-colonialism in other countries today. So that was the issue in South Africa, that a little bit of the problem was solved. Is it the political independence that South Africans were waiting for? No, it was not just political. Most importantly, they were waiting for economic independence. And that is why up to today, what is happening? Now the youths are victims of circumstances. Because the question that I ask is, Why is it that they are not fighting the few whites who own the riches in South
And that
Africa?
is where the problematic
Exactly.
lies.
This is I'm just giving a narrative of what is happening in South Africa.
Just
Why?
to understand that there is a bigger picture.
Exactly, bigger picture
behind
of
what
this.
is happening
Why
in
should
South
they not be
Africa.
fighting the few whites who own the mining fields and all of the wealth in South Africa? They are rather going behind the Africans who have almost nothing in South Africa and
that is
accusing them.
what Julius Malema, while addressing the
Exactly.
situation,
So
said,
it's
that
good that we should.
if you protest and you do not bring a solution,
That is
then
it.
it
That
is
is it.
actually very problematic.
That is it.
Dr.
It is
Dimacho.
good that we make this narrative so that people will get to know, because when people just get up and say, yes, this is happening, there's xenophobia, there is this, and two, the youth are being misled. The youth in South Africa. Well, in one way, they are being misled because politics is also inside it.
Absolutely,
Geopolitics
we're
is also inside
coming
it.
to that.
But most predominantly, the people seem to be helpless because the few whites are the powerful people. You cannot protest against them. They are the one who almost have the power in South Africa. Even though we say the blacks are ruling, they are the ones who have the power. And they look that writing against the powerful whites, it will not bring them anything, because they are like flies to wanton boys in South Africa. This is what we are, the analysts we're looking at. And therefore now they are turning to foreign nationals, and they are their easy target to target them. And why are they turning into foreign nationals? Because you find that there's a lot of competition in the informal sector, in the business, informal business, in the petty businesses that they are doing around them in the quarters.
Sure.
And therefore, they tend to go to people who are closer to them to be able to riot. But let me tell you, what they are doing is just like they are trying to use that situation
Weaponizing
to weaponize the situation,
Absolutely.
to use that situation they're having. It is not directly to those foreign nationals and the poor nationals, foreign nationals that they're fighting. They want to use that situation to project to the world that something is wrong in South Africa. And there is a lot of political manipulation behind that, because you have politics and politicians getting behind them to let them know that South Africa is not well. And therefore the youth are now being brought into the street. They are being sponsored to get into the street to let the world know that there is a problem in South Africa. Look at now, there are no jobs and all of that, and the foreign nationals are now creating that international awareness about South Africa that many people seem not to understand, and now opening the eyes of all those who care to know that there is a problem in South Africa. This is what is happening. And therefore you see that South Africa is competing with Nigeria, first of all, in terms of the economy in Africa. How will you think that a country that is regarded as one of the biggest buoyant country in Africa, we think that it is where we have xenophobia? Why is it that it is much more pronounced in South Africa? We have xenophobia attacks in Africa and the world. When we have Cameroonians in Equatorial Guinea, they were attacked. And many of them were sent back to Cameroon
And
without...
it brings us again to wanting to understand the connotation of terms in different countries, and how this serves the overall global agenda. I'll come back to you subsequently. Dr. Dimacho, I think to continue in line with what you just highlighted, I want us to go back to Paseka Farumeli, where we are looking at the South African. After the 2024 presidential elections, we saw that the parliament is no longer controlled by the African National Congress. South Africa today has some sort of a coalition parliament. That is actually bringing again already some sort of conflict of ideologies between the Democratic Alliance, the African National Congress, and of also Eastern and Western alignment. We know about the diplomatic events that marked South Africa lately. And again, this is coming at a time where some politicians are already calling for the impeachment of incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa. So what can we tell of all of these, gimmicks or maneuvering, taking or weaponizing the situation of unemployed South Africans against foreign or illegal migrants, and the broader political picture that this presents, especially as far as the leadership future of the country is concerned?
Thank you very much, Clarice. Before I go into the GNU government and the role that they might be playing in theory, I think that there's a number of misinformed points that the brother who just spoke made, and it would be unfair for me to continue without addressing these things. I would like to initially point out the fact that South Africa until this day hosts the highest number of foreigners in the country. No other country hosts as many foreigners than South Africa. Legally recognized. Illegally recognized. That means that number more than doubles to what we currently know. So saying that South Africa rejects migration or in any way or form looks at migration in a negative way is very misinformed, and it's very problematic, and it's something that needs to be addressed right now. The brother pointed out that South Africa's problem is white people. I've been preaching for years that we have a problem with whiteness in this country, and it is very problematic, but you must not use it out of context. South Africa houses the highest number of millionaires, black millionaires in this continent. South Africa houses the highest number of black middle class individuals in this continent. So it would be unjust to point out that South Africa still is being controlled by white people when we are actually living relatively comfortable. The issue is the disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest. And if you do not understand that point, then we now have a problem because we are using things that are not statistically backed. To go back to the point of migration has been happening historically. In South Africa, I remember when I was a child, we lived peacefully with migrants in this country. I'm going to point out two things that are very essential that need to be addressed. I am a Pan-Africanist by nature. So when I point out these things, it does not mean that I'm standing up for South Africa, but I'm speaking to facts, because we do not speak to emotions as intellectuals and academics and political analysts. We need to speak to facts. South Africa's informal tuck shop market right now is being run by Ethiopian and Somalian business people, right? However, we need to understand the context in which that is happening. South Africans growing up, the tuck shop economy was owned by South Africans, but strategically and capitalistically, they were very strategic when the Somalians, Ethiopians were able to get into the township. They were able to mass buy and mass sell in a very low price. And then what happened was that they were able to push these individualistic South African tuck shop owners out. And that is fair game. But South Africans started complaining that there's problematic products that these people are selling, which are not the initial products that were being sold. What did they say? We need you to be verified to show that you sell quality product. And at the end of the day, we learned that quite a number of these tuck shops sell illegal products. They sell expired products. They just rebrand them. And if we do not address that, then we are not going anywhere. What happened next? What happened next was that the government itself had to get involved. South Africans in the townships decided to take a decision and say, all right, we will start our own businesses. We will recapture this market. Do you know what happened? The very syndicates started kidnapping South Africans. They started killing South Africans because they said they own the township market in the township. And now I want you to be rational, logical, not emotional in this specific context, and explain this to me. What is a common person living in the township supposed to do in this specific context? Are they supposed to say, no, it's okay, we are going to yield, and then we're going? There's a study that happened a few years ago where we learned that some of these tuck shops, the money that South Africans are using to buy at these tuck shops is being used and transported for terrorist attacks within the continent by ISIS and the likes, and in the Middle East. So if we are not going to address that and make as though there is nothing wrong that people who are protesting foreigners, then we have a problem, because now we are having a dishonest, anti-intellectual conversation historically, and we are proud. And that is why I pointed out the fact that we grew up so happily living with foreigners. But now what has happened is that a lot of misinformation and disinformation has been circulated, and we are not willing to to address this disinformation or investigate and query exactly what happens in the country, because we are coming from a point of emotion, not a point of facts, and that is intellectually incorrect and problematic. And the other point is that South Africans, when we address the point of land, South Africa has 70% plus ownership of land in the country. The land that South Africans consistently speak to and say they want a part in is the land that is commercial farming land. That is very important. We need to understand the distinction between these two. South Africans have a part in the economy, even though it is still very problematic that along racial lines, the white man still controls a huge majority, but it doesn't mean that we've said and not addressed that consistently. So through protest, through decolonization, through fees must fall, votes must fall, we were addressing education, we were addressing the unfairness and the inequality in the country. So we are not useless as people of this country, and I need us to make sure that I continue and I emphasize we need to understand the fact that I, as Pasika Pahumile, I'm a Pan-Africanist by training. Every show, if you go back, and I will speak for a united Africa, but I need us to have an honest conversation. When we speak to illegality, it is essential that we speak about the illegality of men. And I know no man is illegal, but in practice, if we speak to illegality in the country, South Africa faces high crime rates. And it is not just South Africans alone. It is essential to know every crime scene that we see. There is always not always, but there is a foreign international that is involved. If we do not address such things, the government is supposed to, but we need to be honest. And that is the point that I'll speak to later. Going back to your question, Clarissa, and I know I spoke for long and I do apologize. Going back to the GNU, and actually it goes fairly well with this fact that the GNU itself is unstable. They are politically unstable themselves. Why? Because ideologically they are so far removed from each other, but they've decided to unite themselves against parties that would have united African people. So now the DA has funders, Israeli funders. And this is where my theory is, right? Specifically when speaking to these current happenings in the country. As I said, it is not as terrible as it looks. And it shocks people when I provide them with pictures just going around to show what is actually currently happening live in South Africa. It shocks them because they are overwhelmed by this amount of disinformation. The reason I mention Israel is because Ghana itself, before they wanted to take South Africa to the AU to discuss this issue that is currently happening, Ghana itself signed an agreement for better rapports with Israel. Countries that have somehow built relationships with Israel seem to be the most outspoken without addressing the elephant in the room, that you need to sort out matters first before you become ignorant. The DA, the reason why I'm speaking to this example, the DA is very aligned with Israel. They believe there's no apartheid in Israel. They believe there's no genocide in Israel. So I would believe if we hypothesize or theorize that South Africa is currently unstable because they are enabling it and paying for it, because South Africa right now, our number one enemy in the world is clearly Israel, because what they're currently doing to Palestinians and currently to the people of Lebanon, but also their backers, America. But I think I will leave it there, Clarissa. I spoke for too long, but I think that we need to make sure that when we speak from an informed point of view, we speak factually as academics, we speak knowing what we speak to outside of emotions of what we think is happening. Thank you, Clarissa.
Thank you all for your analysis, dear Pasika. Just to let us know that at this juncture, we want to reconcile the the situation in South Africa on this platform. You quite mentioned disinformation and misinformation, and I think those points can be addressed here. Now we go back to you, Purnima Anand, from a people-to-people diplomatic standpoint. When we saw the march against Black Africans in South Africa, it came to mind that some time ago we saw a march in South Africa against genocide in in the Middle East, particularly on Palestine, I beg your pardon. And so it came to mind asking this question that will address some sort of, human to human relationship. The understanding of support for Palestine, and then seeing your identity, because other Africans in South Africa represent the African continent. This question is for us to try to understand the conflicts or controversies surrounding the interpretation of the march in South Africa, and how it presents the country in its own people-to-people diplomacy.
I'm audible, Clarice?
You're audible, please.
Okay. So actually, as our colleagues spoken about South Africa internal situation, and one of our colleague very well established this topic, because South Africa is rising and South Africa is strong, and no doubt that in South Africa, external forces are working to create the disturbances, because South Africa as an international land of opportunities, attracting investments. And as I know, black billionaires are investing a lot in Africa and South Africa. And South Africa is the best country for the investment if from outside Africa, if we observe. So this is really very important to observe carefully, that what are the reason of the aggression. Yes, we understand, as our colleague said, about some cases what happened. It is really not human level, but it is not the complete reason of the aggression and regis. So point to be noted that in many countries such aggression develop. I am from India. In India also, because one of our colleagues said about black and white issues. But in our country, Muslim and Hindu issues are very high, and means people are killed on spot, this and that, sometimes fires, something happens. But mostly when we go deeper, it is not act of common people and local level. It is always promoted by from the outside. Maybe it is political. Sometimes different political parties create such environment that one party, just to destroy the image of one president or prime minister, and one if he is succeeding in some goals. So parties also do such acts. So this is the really very important, and this is really good discussion today, that we are understanding what are the causes, what are the reason of this march, and what are the reason of aggression in South Africa. I understand that because as an international expert, I feel this is a kind of disturbance creating in South Africa to stop its growth, to stop the opportunities for next generation. Because if such disturbances will happen, then naturally growth, it will impact to growth, to GDP, to economical rise. And nowadays we also need to understand that problems are in all countries. Every country is facing economical problem, and they are having disturbances inside their countries. So South African government, South African civil organizations, and other Africans, international organization need to do very good analysis that they should not give any impact to the evil power. they are growing. This is very high time for South Africa and Africa to make their rise, to make good opportunities for their future generation. This is all I can say, but naturally our local colleagues and African colleagues can tell more better what is their understanding, what is their analysis. But yes, one thing I can say, it is not normal and it is not done by people, because people never want to destroy their local houses. They never want to destroy their government system. As I understand, people to people dialogue can solve any problem. But definitely upper powers are there who are accelerating their aggression, who are accelerating their problems. So they are coming out and they are acting for march or for other unhuman actions. But I know if you will create in your country people to people dialogue, you can get the solution and people understand their good and they understand what is good for their children. And no doubt every human being wants peace and development. Thank you.
Indeed, people to people dialogue, but then how practical is that with the greater agenda that we all are aware, especially when it comes to the geopolitical dynamics of the situation in South Africa. Here we are looking at the vulnerable population with you, Dr. Dacina. Actually, you've been very involved in migration issues and, of course, coming in contact with vulnerable society and even mobile communities. So, in your perspective, what are the most important warning signs of that a public anti-migration campaign is shifting into xenophobic violence or some sort of social exclusion? And from what has been presented on this panel, I would also love, while answering this question, for us to answer if xenophobia is the right term to use to probably define what is actually happening in South Africa at this juncture.
Thank you so much, Clarice, for this question. I think when we talk about xenophobia, there are many things that we need to take into account. So it's mainly about social rejection.
Please, can you activate your video?
Can you hear me?
Yes, but we can't see you. Please, your video.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I was saying when we talk about xenophobia, there are many things that we need to understand. It's about the lack of acceptance of other, to move side by side. It is manifested in many ways. For example, South Africa, we see that foreign nationals are repeatedly blamed for socio-economic problems that the country is facing. And then this creates conditions of normalizing violence and insecurity. And when we go further, we see that unlike what my brother Good News said, that Africa is not xenophobic, there is also this political branding other African brothers and sisters. Like here in South Africa, they are called kwere. So it's a way of othering others, creating some kind of a line to show that we are not like them. And then this also will manifest in the way that people are behaving through some inflammatory rhetoric. And we have seen that coming often, especially during the time of election, where we see political leaders vying for support. They will bring some inflammatory statements that blaming foreign nationals to be the root cause of the problems that the country is facing. And that goes even further to see that even the media will just reproduce these statements. And as we know, we are in the era of social media. Some information can be real or not real, but in the mind of the people, it changes their attitude towards the presence of foreign nationals in the country. It goes even further when we see some vigilant movement taking place, going from one place to the other, trying to stop foreign nationals from accessing some basic services like we have seen it at the health care facilities. All these are warning signs that something very terrible is coming if no measures are taken. And what we have seen is that on the part of the government, sometimes they just come with making some statements, some political declarations standing against xenophobic violence. Yes, it's symbolically important, but it doesn't contribute to address the entrenched xenophobic practices that have taken root in the attitude and the actions of the people on the ground. So these are the warning signs that we mainly see happening before violence, physical violence, can take place in the South African environment.
Indeed, and all this brings the table, or probably the stakes back to the governing body, the leadership of South Africa, and also to a greater extent looking at what role governance can play at this moment. With you, good news, Cadogan, with all the stakes which you actually I highlighted that real and practical governance that actually addresses the realities of the population or the people will help to actually curtail some of the instances which are viewed today as xenophobic in nature. So, as a Pan-African leadership coach, what governance mechanism should the government of national unity adopt at this pressing moment? It is already obvious that it's a fragile political scope for the Rainbow Nation, given the recent flare, where we see even some political parties using it to actually garner some relevance in the political sphere.
Thank you very much, Clarice. And when we look at this situation that we are facing in South Africa, it's not necessarily about a shift in the public attitude since the days before apartheid. What has happened here is that the system is broken. The state has failed. The first failure is border control. When there is no border control, you have got porous borders, under-resourced ports of entry. The perception is that the state isn't managing, and that's a sovereignty issue. There is no state amongst the states in Africa that has got an open book insofar as migration is concerned. There's no ways you can have free migration, uncontrolled, ungoverned, with no proper identification. The second failure that we have is poor administration and non-enforcement of existing legislation. The Immigration Act exists on paper, yes, but there are backlogs, there are lost files, and slow adjudication. And as a result of that, there are parallel systems that are running. And to add on to that, you have got corruption. When permits and IDs are sold, it doesn't only compromise South Africans. It also compromises the law-abiding migrants who are here, having applied and having been admitted to live and work here as academics, as health practitioners, and all sorts of other people that we need to fill in the critical skills gap that we have in South Africa. The business is also involved. Business leadership failure is exploiting this informality, where you find that some employers, they hire these undocumented workers to undercut wages so that they don't have to pay UIF and other compliance regulations that they have to adhere to. So in the end, this pits the worker against worker, and it creates the resentment that you see, and is created by harmful business practices. That is what is happening. And lastly, what I would like to highlight is that when we call for open borders with no plan for absorption, it means then it's a free-for-all. And it also blocks the rational policy conversations that we should be having from an economic point of view to say, how do we develop the structural dynamics of our economy to cater for a population growth that you are not even able to forecast because the borders are open. You could have 2 million people coming in 1 year, another 5 million coming in another year. So there is no proper planning that is being done to make sure that government can actually provide public services for a known population growth and a known population number. So in the end, to bring up all of these points to bear is that the problem isn't that South Africa doesn't want Africans here. The problem is that the state has outsourced immigration so that in the end, it's the corrupt and the informal economy that are managing all these things. Thank you. Thank you, Clarice.
Let me stay with you, Good News Cadogan. You've identified that the problem is not like South Africans do not want other Africans, but the reality of on the ground, to an extent, we have listened to the leader of the Jadula Operation Jadula. We have listened to some statements and coming from other South Africans that engage in the march and the protest. So how can we reconcile this to make the South Africa fertile and healthy for cohabitation with other Africans, of course, in this very critical moment? Because their point is not on the government, but actually
has to happen within the confines of the law. Mm-hmm. You can't have people coming and going in an uncontrolled manner and hope that there will be peace. The strife that we are facing now is because there is no control. There is failure of government. There's a failure of leadership, not just in government, but in business as well. Mm-hmm. At some point when I was in Paris, I saw a similar kind of challenge there, where you find that in the hospitality industry, the restaurant owners would employ undocumented nationals and exploit them and pay them less than the locals. So in the end, if I were to say how we can reconcile the two, fix governance, put controls in place, raise the level of compliance, and make sure that anybody that comes and goes is in the context of the law, in the context of public policy.
Thank you so much. It's about public policy, and Dr. Michael Dimancho. Let's now understand, like, how trying to see how the maybe authorities in South Africa and other countries in Africa can actually reconcile some sort of, national sovereignty with the realities of the stakes of the philosophy of Pan-Africanism. Because if today migration is an issue not just in Africa but across the globe, we're seeing this in Europe, where migration policies are changing. We saw when Donald Trump came, we saw the stance on migration, and today we are now facing the same situation in Africa at the time that a different philosophy or song is actually across the ends of the continent on cohesion togetherness, unity is strength, to be able to have that practical full sovereignty at every level for the dream of a united Africa.
Yes, Clarice, I will still come back to this. Sometimes, sometimes some panelists speak from the point of view of emotions. I'm talking like our panelists from South Africa. Sometimes when we use emotions in some of those things, we don't solve any problem. I still insist. I have done studies on South Africa, and I have realized that South Africa has an issue, and they don't want to catch the issue itself to solve. They are chasing it around the bush. You see,
so what is the issue? Let us
you see, South Africa is like, let me say, South Africa is the United States of America, where the blacks want to make the country what it is. South Africa is considered as an African power in terms of economy today. And let me tell you, they are Africans that make South Africa. They are migrants that make South Africa what it is today. I want to tell even our co-panelists from South Africa, that we know exactly the reality of South Africa. Let me tell you, at the point when South Africa got up from the roots, well, I will quote it back, was around 1867, when diamond was discovered in Kimberley. There were not South Africans who were employed to work in the diamond and the fields. When in 1886, gold was discovered and Witwatersrand, there were not South Africans who were employed to work in that mining field. They were Africans, especially from Botswana, from Zimbabwe, from Lesotho. Africans who came forth to work, they were employed because Africans did not want to work in the gold mines. And I am paraphrasing Julius Malema. He says the jobs that foreigners do in this country, if you ask South Africans to do, they will not do. So in one way, we want to say that South Africans want the white-collar jobs. I went to one country where actually some administrators openly said it, that our youth do not want to go to the farms, do not want to work, in those kind of, third-class jobs. They want only office jobs. And exactly this is what South Africans are into. And we have to talk about that, because there is already a problem. Even if we had an issue with migrants, why are South Africans taking the law into their hands?
They said, according to the policy, power belongs to the people, and they're executing.
They are executing democracy wrongly. You are only free under the law. That is democracy.
This is actually now sending a message.
That is the thing. So let us South Africans not tell us that power belongs to the people. How? How do you get on and behave in a very, very askance and terroristic manner, and you say the power belongs to the people? You only are free under the law. And therefore, what they are sending across, I want to say that they are chasing an elephant, and the real elephants and the real game that they want to catch is not that elephant that they are chasing. So they should be very, very careful. South African, many other countries are living that. We have had countries in Africa who talks about foreigners getting in and taking and whatsoever, but we have not had this kind of heightened or this kind of climax, this apogee of crisis that is actually plaguing the country as what South Africans are doing. We know already that South Africa, you are asking about what we have to look forward to. There should be solidarity. The history should be remembered. This is the first thing. History should be remembered. The country South Africa was not made by South Africans who are clamoring for their freedom today. The country was made by migrants and African migrants. I must quote it very squarely. And therefore, if you remember that, then you have to look at, even there are strong kingdoms like the Zulus and the Soto and whatsoever. Those are Bantus who went there. They have to know that. And that most of these migrants have already been instilled into the culture of South African, and they have to accommodate them. If there is an issue of crime, like I heard somebody talk about issues of crime, is there a place without crime? Every place has crime, but it has to be regulated. And to regulate, you don't have to take the law into your hand in order to regulate. So what they are actually making us understand is that the South African government is weak, that it cannot regulate those crimes. This is what they are telling you indirectly. And therefore, there is already a problem. Because they have way to lay their claims, to lay their problems, and they are not laying. Or will they tell us that they report and the government doesn't do anything, and therefore they are taking things into their hands? I think that we need to be a little bit serious here, because I have said something, and I still continue and insist that South Africa has a problem of the economy. It is a powerhouse in Africa, but they still have a problem of economy. Somebody may say that there are black Africans who are very rich in South Africa, but the gap is too wide. And when the gap is too wide, there is bound to be a problem. You have rich people in every country, but when the rich is too rich and the poor too poor, there is bound to be a problem. Because you have a chunk of, of course, I can quote some of the richest people in South Africa. I know some of them by name. I mean, the popular one is Motsepe. It's one of them. I know some, I can quote them by name. But then there are a chunk of South Africans who are very rich compared to the white people who are there. And the few have the affluence of riches in South Africa. It is a continuation of disguised appetite. And therefore, the youth are disgruntled. And because they are disgruntled, they still have this issue of, do you know that during the apartheid you had what South Africans they call the passbook, where the South Africans, before they even travel, they needed what they call the passbook. It appears as if the youth in South Africa still have what they call the passbook because they do not have a say. And they are afraid to complain where it's supposed to be complained. They are afraid to riot and talk about the real problems of South Africa. Let South African youth talk about their real problems. It is true. And it is not by mistake that they are rich. It is true that many people, I talked about the issues of the push and the pull factor of migration. People have discovered South Africa because their ancestors built South Africa the way it is today. We Africans as a whole supported South Africa the way it is today. South Africa has grown to be that powerhouse where many people are looking up to. It is now a pull factor because of its amenities, because of its health system, because of its education, because of its social, amenities and all of those. Now, people want to get there to enjoy some of these amenities. Yes, it is good that nobody, I know there are some people travel by foot to go to South Africa, but most of the people go to South Africa, they obtain visas to go. I met some 3 Nigerians who actually told me they got their visas to South Africa and they were living in real, well legalized conditions in South Africa. But you just get people coming from anywhere to come and question them. And they don't need to know whether they have papers or they don't have papers. All they want to say is, they want them to leave. And you ask them, why do you want them to leave? They tell them they have taken their jobs. Let me tell you, this sentence alone, they have taken our jobs, is a sign of laziness. And we must cry for about it. How do you say somebody has taken your job? It means that South African youth are not competitive in the job market. They are not incentive. They are not innovative. They do not create jobs. They are not entrepreneurs. How do you come and tell Africans that they have taken your jobs? This is laziness of its highest form. And Africans must have to shame this because this is a shame to us Africans. And nobody should defend this. And when I'm talking about this, I think that emotions, talking about some of these things is not welcome. We need to be educated people. And we should talk like educated people. We should not give defense about things that are actually should be thrown into the dustbin. We Africans have gone past this. And like Rosa Parks in 1952, we have borne so much for so long a time. It is time that we rise up and we live above this. And I cried, beloved Steve Biko, like Ala Patton will write in his book. And I say that Africans must go above this. We must recognize what we ourselves did to ourselves, what we stood for in terms of black consciousness, what we stood for or what we are standing for Pan-Africanism, what we are standing for Afrocentrism, what we are standing for feminism, what we are standing for as an African that is stands to be united. That African, the OAU, Organization of African Unity, that started in 1963, changed in 2013 to the AU, the African Union, and inaugurated in the year 2000. That we are one and we must build as a people. Because when you start segregating, Who is saying that another person is not an African and that he should go to his country? Because they came and gave and put these boundaries, or the Europeans divided us into boundaries. Now you say, now when we talk about the prior to the arrival of the colonialism, because when you look at the history of South Africa, before the arrival of colonialism, there were no boundaries, and that's why the Soto and the Zulus and all of those people, the Bantus, they went into South Africa without anybody control and they settled. So why do we now say that this one is an African from Nigeria, this one African from Zimbabwe, this one African from Botswana, and all of those? We should accept. If we accepted that they should be regularized, it is fine. Does he have a passport? Is he living legally? Is the job that he's having, is it registered? And all of that, I think that this is what they should carry on their placard if they want to have an international support. Not that somebody will come and say that they have taken our jobs away.
And of course, that is why we say that there is a junction of complexities, wanting to understand. At the end, we need to reconcile constructively to not derail from the African dream of unity. And with you, Paseka Faramale, with all that has been said, I will say that there is some sort of a web where we find politicians, businesses, and then disgruntled young people who have actually defined their scope of activism, capitalizing on the presence of other Africans on their in South Africa, I beg your pardon. So now let's look at how the different interests, particularly by politicians and the businesses, is actually somehow overwhelming the prime interests of inclusive development that will solve the problems of young South Africans, and to a larger extent eliminate instances of that will be calling xenophobia or anger meted on other Africans.
Thank you very much, Clarice. I think most of what you're raising, I think Dr. Dostin and Good News to an extent they spoke to, especially Good News in the last comment. And something that is important that I point out, the reason why I cannot speak to the doctor's previous comment is because Good News spoke to them, and to an extent, Nima also spoke to them. It is said that this funny stereotype or this funny rumor that South Africans are lazy, it's one of those conversations that you hear in America. And I don't necessarily enjoy speaking about them because I've got a lot of problems with these specific people who say that Black Americans are lazy. They want to do the work. You see something similar here in South Africa. And I always laugh at that thing because since growing up until this day, actually growing up in the township, at 4 o'clock until this day, South Africans are the earliest people to wake up to go to work or to seek work. At 6 or 6:30 in the morning, the majority of South Africans in the world, like these statistics are in the world, people who wake up the earliest. You already hear taxis moving at 4:30, 4:30 in the morning. And those are South Africans going to work. So when people tell you that South Africans are lazy, it's this, to call it it's a lazy way of thinking. It's social media rhetoric. It is uninformed, and it is sad because every time I hear comments like South Africans are lazy, I see what time South Africans go to seek for work. I see what time South Africans are going to work. And Brother Good News spoke to something that is important. Why South Africans have a problem with certain jobs. It is illogical. It is an African to not want to fight for what you are owed. So if right now what is currently happening, as he previously explained, South Africans reject certain jobs because the private sector, these farms that we were speaking to earlier on, they take advantage of the foreign international so that they can give them next to nothing. But we need to understand the context in where that comes from. The money, if you get, let's say, 100 rands, maybe $20 in South Africa, when you go to Zimbabwe, because of the reality of the economic, because of the realistic economic situation in that place, that's a lot of money. But in South Africa, it becomes very difficult for a person to function. So in actual fact, we should be addressing governance, which is something that is essential. We should be addressing the private sector that enables this behavior. But now, if we approach this from a point of view of being uninformed and using social media, Twitter, Facebook rhetoric, then we are not going to move anywhere. I want to point out something that is essential, right? Dr. Dustin pointed out a big critique of South Africa, and I agree, definitely agree with him when he speaks about what builds to actual attacks. And he gave a very precise theoretical approach to what is this, what happens, how do we get to a point. That is an informed position outside of emotions, outside of anger. So now when we speak to governance in this country, when we speak to building a narrative, when we speak to historical examples of what happens before an election, as we know later on in the year, the date I think has been announced for November, if I'm not mistaken, there is a local election. And Dr. Dustin said something that is essential, that politicians are able to also manipulate narration. And, you know, in every show, I point out to the fact that I hate the South African government because of how broken they are, how inhumane they are, and lastly, how corrupt they are. Because a lot of the problems would have been fixed. As Brother Good News spoke when he was addressing the question that you asked him, he said, fix a bordering system and make sure that you are able to know who is in the country. And don't forget, I advocate for an open border continent because I genuinely do believe, until this day, I genuinely do believe that an open border Africa is our solution to our problems in the continent. But I am not delusional to the realities of the continent. Because once we now become delusional and we do not speak to what will actually happen, then we've lost the plot. We are not speaking factually from an informed point of view. So with that being said, I think that if the government would fix itself, we wouldn't even be in this space to have this conversation, have this discourse, and to make sure that when we speak informed and having done research. That is my last word, Clarice. And I do understand I didn't necessarily speak to your point, but I think that we are losing each other. And it is sad. It is genuinely sad that we are where we find ourselves right now. Thank you, Clarice.
Talk to be able to understand the stakes and come to a compromise. How can we then build trust between Africans living in other countries, particularly in South Africa? We will now want to look at it somehow with you, Dr. Dustin. There is something that when you look at the reality of what is happening in South Africa today, it is actually appealing to the human consciousness, to the human fabric of the aspect. But then when we want to look at the unity of the continent and the challenges, we are going back to the 2020, 2021, looking at it critically from the adoption of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and of course the diplomatic milestone that countries in Africa have been recorded. Will also acknowledge that since that time, or from that time till now, the continent has witnessed some sort of controversies, crisis, actually tarnishing, I beg your pardon, the African agenda of togetherness. You know, we cannot talk about a revolutionized Africa or Africa with full sovereignty when there are some sort of critical hard discrepancies along economic lines, along political lines, and even diplomatic lines. Of course, thanks to the Botswanan government for actually bringing out a statement to, Council, what has been circulated as the country cutting diplomatic ties with South Africa and even cutting power supplies. So now it is how mechanisms that we can use to rebuild trust and make the African person understand what is there for the African continent, and of course how we can withstand the external pressure undermining the dream of a unified Africa.
Thank you so much, Clarice, for your question. I just want to highlight something before I come back to your question, to say that when we talk about migration, migration is often demonized. It's perceived as a threat, but we're not also focusing on the positive side of migration.
Absolutely.
It is true, as my brother Paseka said, that South Africa is one of the top African countries that house migrants. As we know that nowadays, because of the European borders that have become very tough to penetrate, many African migrants are within Africa. And in South Africa, we don't also tend to see what is the contribution of migrants to the economy of the country. Migrants contribute. There are migrants who are also business owners and who often employ some South Africans, working with them and gaining some means of living through this activity. This one, we don't see it. We don't present it as a good side of migration. But I know that when it comes to South Africa, the main problem is the dysfunctionality of Home Affairs when it comes to the issue of documentation. When we talk about the documentation crisis, we are not only singling migrants. We can see even among the South African citizens, there are many who are still undocumented. So for me, I'm not talking about illegality. I talk about undocumentedness. Because we see people, when they come for the first time, they can apply for documentation, and then when time comes for the renewal of this permit, it becomes impossible for them to get their permit renewed. And in that condition, they become undocumented because they cannot get the permit renewed. These are the cases that we see. And when it comes also to migration management, there are a lot of shortfalls that we see that Home Affairs is not able to address. Like when it comes to the issues of asylum permit, you can imagine that there are people who have been in that on that status for more than 20 years. So they've never even seen their case being moved to another level. So these are the problems that South Africa is facing and that needs solution. Because if we don't find solutions to these problems, it's very difficult to talk about moving forward. And the South African population, nowadays it's sitting at 65 million people. So when we talk about influx of migrants, we also need to remove some myths that we always have. Migrant population makes up only 4%, less than 4% of the South African population. So I don't think that this 4% can overwhelm the health system or the economy of the country.
Yeah.
If we compare with the majority of the people who are South Africans. Now, coming to the issue of borders, this is very, very important. I think there have been discussions about these borders these are the legacy of colonization. If you go, for example, to Western Africa, you see countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Togo. These countries, people are mixed. You see Yorubas in Ghana, you see Yorubas in Nigeria, you see them somewhere else, you see Hausa. So there are some issues about illegal crossing. We are not promoting illegal crossing. It does happen. And before these borders that the colonization has given us, we know that our people used to move freely from one place to the other without any control. That's why we can see this mixture of people. But now, Something that people are not paying attention to is that the same colonizers have come back to invest again in border control in Africa. We see the externalization of border control now is taking place in Africa, and African leaders cannot agree with the idea of removing borders because that's where their power lies. And that's where they draw their interest from. So if you remove the border, their powers will no longer exist. They will no longer have opportunity for their interest. That's why they can easily agree with the colonizer, the former colonizer, to give them money so that they can reinforce control, reinforce borders. Because European countries, America, they know that if people keep on moving, they will end up in Europe or in America. They will try by all means to stop people from moving. And how do they do that? They give money to African leaders to reinforce border control in order to stop people from moving. That's why this idea of Pan-Africanism is not moving forward. The idea of removing borders is still a utopia because of these kind of realities on the ground. Thank you.
Indeed, understanding the realities on the ground and being more strategic and practical about solving the problems, actually stopping the full, unification of the African continent, that will actually give impetus to intra-Africa trade and removing the barriers, which I think it is already some sort of agenda that the revolutionary leaders actually in the Sahel states implementing among other aspects. How can we then reconcile all of the interest of politicians, businesses, and also the vulnerable society in order to achieve a clear developmental development trajectory that will solve for many problems of the young people, the vibrant young people across Africa. And this is where we want to understand, of course, with you, Purnima Anand, trying to holistically see how we can reconcile youth activism, nationalism, and the aspects of xenophobia, and how youths can be educated to ensure that they are not instruments or catalysts used by politicians to attain some sort of selfish agenda that will not solve the very core problems affecting them.
Thank you, Clarissa. This is really interesting question about young people, because young people is a future of Africa and South Africa. It is very important that common consciousness and people-to-people dialogue should be raised in the society, in the community. And young people should understand. Now, it is not a question of corruption, whatever topics and points our colleagues raised about black and white and corruption and external and internal forces. Now, main key question is that our economic cooperation. South Africa is a heart of BRICS, and if South Africa is getting problem, whole BRICS structure will also disturb. So, as a BRICS countries important nation and rising nation, South Africa young generation need to be come in front side because this is a digital age. Information is easily available, technology is available, and economic cooperations are available. We should understand that aggression cannot give us growth. This is the important thing South African young people and African young people should understand it. They are having opportunities, equal opportunities as European having, as Americans having, as Global South is having. Yes, we understand problems are there, because financial structure and burdens on governments are everywhere. All nations are having problem. Even America is having problem of the migrants. all countries, people are living in America, black, white, all community, Muslim, Hindu, everybody is there. And sometimes they also face communal problems and black and white problems, but they control. It depends on government how they make the peace and coalition. So it is very important that after today's discussion, we got so many points and all points are relevant. Maybe discussion was this side or that side, but it was very good discussion. And now what we suggest through this conversation today in Globus channel, and thank you Clarice, you organize it, that South African government should control it and South African government should give equal opportunities to the young generation. South Africa should understand they are the leader of Africa and they are the leader of Africa in international front. So South Africa responsibility is very important and it is a rainbow of Nelson Mandela. We all respect South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and we are looking forward for the growth of South Africa as well as Africa. And we want that young people should come up and they should understand their right, their responsibility, and they should get opportunities from digital information in digital age. So this is all we could say today. And we believe that this aggression, these presentations and these marches which are happening in South Africa will be settled down soon. Thank you.
Absolutely, it will be settled down soon with the right policies and the right narratives. If we are actually, ladies and gentlemen, culminating today's program, so we'll give our guests just 1 minute each to conclude and make recommendations as we continue to monitor events in South Africa and elsewhere across the continent. Beg your pardon. I start off with you. Good news, Kadogan.
Good. Thank you very much, Clarice, and almost like a farewell to my fellow panelists. And I've enjoyed being here this afternoon or evening. My closing remark is around probably 3 things. One is leadership. Leadership in business, leadership in government, and in the public and community in general. If there's no leadership displayed there, all of what we need to do to fix South Africa is not going to happen. And if we let the systems to collapse, the relationship at a person-to-person level between South Africans and other Africans is going to spiral down to a point whereby now xenophobia becomes an issue. So it's not about changing of attitudes, mainly it's about changing the systems, strengthening the systems so that there's compliance and there's also predictability of the migration and movement of people in such a manner that criminals or crime does not prosper as a result of lack of controls.
Absolutely, it's about all stakeholders playing their respective roles to ensure that we limit or mitigate crime and solve the many problems of the young population. Recommendations from you, Paseka Farumale, especially at this critical juncture for the South Africa as a nation, given also the controversies surrounding its leadership and how all of the manifestation of xenophobic protests to an extent defines the internal discrepancies along the political lines in the country.
Thank you very much, Clarice. I'm trying to think of what is logical, right? In terms of, you said we have a minute. So I just want to touch on what needs to happen. It's very administrative in a sense that we will only see more and more of these Afrophobic attacks until the government is actually fit to rule. And for the majority of South Africans who are in a place of frustration, I think it's as a result of living on the brink, looking at a government that is so corrupt, so broken that it has decided that it is going to use people's tax money for their own satisfaction. It is essential that that leadership gets resolved one way or another. I am not one for coups because I think that it's a very it can be because others they tend to work out. It can be a very problematic thing. But I think for us to start by fixing our problems, we need to change the government that currently rules this country. If we can fix that, I think that most people would be slightly more satisfied, but also changing it to someone who is correct, because there are very, as Dr. Dustin said, there are very problematic parties that campaign from a point of view of Afrophobia, very attacking of the foreign internationals. And those guys, we cannot allow them to be our president. We don't want a Donald Trump in South Africa. That needs to be rectified.
Absolutely.
And we need to make sure that we are aware of any influence that aims only to destabilize this country, because there's a lot of disinformation, there's a lot of information that circulates out there. You look at the case of white genocide, we know where it comes from, we know how it was developed. The facts do not agree to it. What is on the ground does not agree with it. We need to be aware that there is a third hand that is at play. Or this youth is going to experience the same thing that the previous generation faced. So if we do not resolve that, if we do not build better rapport with our own neighbors that we need to, I don't see us going anywhere. We will be stagnant. And thank you very much, Clarice. I was hopeful that we would have a way that we would see an Africa that is united without borders, but I've become very skeptical. For years, I've been preaching that on this show.
Absolutely.
But looking at the continent and how the leaders are moving, I do not see that happening anytime soon, because they are very nationalistic in their approach. And Dr. Dustin also did touch on this. He said, a lot of them are going to lose power. I apologize for speaking too long, but thank you.
Absolutely, there's always a lot to say regarding the stakes across the African continent. We will continue to do our best to contribute our quota to the real emancipation and development of Africa. And with you, Dr. Dustin, let's now look at the real stakes of unity for South Africa that will reconcile the realities of a continental agenda. Is Dr. Dustin still with us, please? Please, can you unmute your mic, please?
Are you?
Okay, we can hear you now.
Are you talking to me, Clarice?
We are good. We are good. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you so much. It was lovely to be part of this panel discussion, and I really enjoyed various perspectives and insights from all the panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this topic. On my side, I would just say that something that needs to be understood is that where impunity is perceived, it breeds repetition. Where accountability delays, it creates space for confidence to be weakened. And where leadership is hesitant, it opens room to forces that threaten order and justice. South African governance has a key role to play in protecting all persons, irrespective of their origin, hold perpetrators accountable in transparency. When I'm talking about perpetrators, I don't mean only those who are committing xenophobia. Even migrants who are illegal, who are committing unlawful practices in the country must be held accountable with transparency, and also reinforce public messages that encourages peaceful coexistence and discourages all xenophobia in all its forms. strengthen the alignment between constitutional ideals and the conduct of the people in the country. I know that the country is facing many challenges, but I have to say that it's not by removing foreign nationals from the country that solutions to these challenges will come. Solutions requires sustainable management that addresses the real problems of inequality, unemployment among the youth, and social exclusion, which is creating frustration and prompting people to commit violence. South Africa is one of the proponents of Africanism ideology. And South Africa is also promoting African solidarity. But it has to do everything in respect with human dignity, in respect with the laws and regulations of the country. And the challenge is to manage migration through lawful and evidence-based rights, not to rely on myth and some inflammatory statements that are always putting oil on the fire and creating tensions among the people. One thing also that needs to be mentioned, that South Africa has this vocation of investing in other African countries. And South Africa has a lot of investment in African countries, in banking, in telecommunications, in agriculture, in mining. And when xenophobia takes place in South Africa, it tarnishes the image of South Africa in other African countries and also disrupts South African potential to invest in those countries and to gain more resources that can help the country also to face its problems of unemployment and social situation that people are facing in their daily lives. So I think that by so doing, South Africa is going to gain respect, and also to be one of the key figures, the key African countries that promote African unity, African solidarity, and human dignity among the people and among the countries. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention.
Indeed, thank you so much for your presence and insight, Dr. Dosing. And we culminate with you, Dr. Michael Dimanche, answering the question if the practical implementation of the Ubuntu philosophy can actually solve some of these problems that appeal to the human fabric, like what we are seeing in South Africa as xenophobia, and how this the philosophy can help to strengthen continental integration around the continent, rather.
Yes, Clarice, I think that we need to build on our epistemologies too. As you made mention of Ubuntu, and I think about Desmond Tutu, who is a major propounder of this epistemological research tool. And it is about you are because I am because you are. It is very, very important, because we may be given a wrong image about, and accidentally or coincidentally, Ubuntu, Desmond Tutu was from South Africa. And I think that we really need to keep his legacy. It is, one of my dreams has always been to visit his library, because this is a very, very powerful epistemology that he propounded. And of course, I have used that in most of my books. I even use the Ubuntu theory to be able to show how we can be able to build from Africa, you know, about the Tontine, the Njangis, and the self-help, and all of those are Ubuntu actually practices that we need to build from. And talking about, there's also the Ojama or Jama that we're talking about. I mean, Africanality that we are talking about, which of course we need to use that to build. But then I'm talking about, because we keep on talking about xenophobia and we are not looking at the broad-based consequences of some of these, because we only concentrate on the act. Yeah, we need to look at the consequences of these in the long run, because the issues of xenophobia may bring about what? Regional diplomatic rupture, which we are not even looking at. And I keep asking myself, is the issue of African unity just in words, in slogans, and not in practice? Because if it was really in practice, this is an issue that touches on Africa, and that the African Union will have already intervened. I keep on being worried. I keep on taking the African Union to task. And I say these are issues you don't sleep over, because it's an issue that concerns Africa, because diplomatic, issues may fall in, and then you will have a long time effect. The fallout may be so many. And we can also be thinking about the political radicalization that may happen in South Africa. I'm asking the leaders in South Africa, Ramaphosa and his people, why do you allow this to go for so long without bringing a solution to that? I think that you need to arrest some of these things when they are still young, when they are still fresh, when they are just started. Because when you leave them go for so long, it is going to be very, very difficult to actually work on it. And I'm also thinking about the international reputation, the tarnishing of the image of South Africa. Do you know that this can stop a lot of people from having South Africa as a destination? Since maybe the South Africans, they need only Europe and Americans to come. They may also tarnish their image. So they desire Europeans and Americans whom they want to come may no longer come because they are feeling unsafe. So these are issues that we need to solve. And I know that, I know it is a very difficult task for leaders that came after Mandela, because, when you set some standards, we know that Mandela set some standards who were very high. And for somebody to maintain those standards is very, very difficult. But I think they need to keep on striving and trying. It is very easy, sometimes we say that it's very easy to win a Nobel Peace Prize, but it's not easy to maintain it. So it is important that we keep striving, because it is an African issue. It is not just a South African issue. Because what happened in South Africa, it may turn out to happen in Nigeria. I already heard Nigerians are thinking about the MTN, about the South African investment in Nigeria. Do people know the ripple effects of all of these? This is going to carry on and carry on and carry on. And then before long, we have gone far apart again. And then those of us who keep singing about the issues of black consciousness, the issues of Pan-Africanism, the issue of African unity, now become just a slogan. And now we only have to attend the conferences and then come back and sit.
Of course, I think we are going to solve the problems here on the platform Global Insight with such discussions that do separate the noise from the fact we can build a more constructive agenda that will help to inform, educate the African people, particularly the African youth, and their probably a responsibility towards the integration and the unity of the African continent as a whole, because of abuse of social media, or the fourth industrial revolution somehow is actually having some sort of negative effects because of the disinformation and agenda setting that comes from citizen journalism, or people who do not have the right stake of affairs, exaggerating and making a situation look so moment and actually difficult. Thank God that we had, or thanks to the panelists from South Africa, situating us on the real stakes on the ground. And of course, we want to appreciate also Purnima Anand, who actually represented the international point of view, and to you as a political analyst and civil society, Dr. Dimanche, for giving diverse interpretations to the reality in South Africa and how this can undermine the unity of the continent, and of course put it at a state of vulnerability, especially during this tumultuous global moment. And it is on this note, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to thank you for today's program. While acknowledging the technical crew for this amazing job, hoping to have you subsequently as we continue to analyze, to discuss, to inform things that do matter, helping to shape the right agenda for the African continent. Bye-bye and have a lovely moment as you continue watching programs on the Pan-African television.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you
Dr.
all the
Tostin.
today.
Dr. Tostin.
Yes.
Good
Dr.
news.
Tostin, can I quickly just say